Hi, it's Nycci Nellis. Welcome back to Industry Night, the show that takes you on a deep dive on the happenings of the food, wine, and hospitality industry. So here I am at the gorgeous Wine Lair. I'm so grateful that they sponsor this show, and every week we come to you with an array of guests from the DC metro area, nationally, and internationally, talking about what's happening in the hospitality industry. So if you're new here, hey, welcome. Thanks for joining me. A little bit about me. So I've been covering the food, wine, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years. If you're local to DC, you read the list, areyouonit.com, the online e-zine that tells you absolutely everything that's happening in the DC metro area, and honestly, a little bit beyond. Of course, you follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, I guess it's called X now, Threads, LinkedIn, and this show is now on YouTube. So please subscribe, and I hope you're watching. Every Sunday, you hear my husband David and I on Foodie and the Beast. We have been on air for 15 years this October, and it is still DC's only food and wine variety show. So definitely tune in on 1500. And I think that's where you find me. Oh yeah, sometimes you hear me on WTOP, and of course I'm on TV every now and again too. So stay tuned for all the fun things that I am doing. Okay, so if you pay attention to my Insta feed, you do know that I go out and about and I cover it pretty hardcore. And normally at this part of the show, I would take you on a little journey with me on all the places that I've been. But I have two superstars in studio, and I am going to go right to them. So I know I have mentioned being at the JBAward Awards quite a few times, but I'm going to mention it again because it pertains to one of today's guests. Yes, I'm a full believer in the JBAward mission, reason one why I was there. And yes, I did get the gig of a lifetime when Hilton hired me to be their ambassador on the red carpet. And I got to interview all the amazing culinary people. Case in point, JBAward Award winner, woo, Rubba. Now, Robb and I go a bit of a ways back. In fact, he was on Foodie and the Beast before anybody knew his name. I just want to make that perfectly clear. He was about to open up, actually, he wasn't even about to. Hazel was still in pop-up form, and it was going to open up by Neighborhood Restaurant Group. It did indeed open up, but that's how long ago. And look at baby now, he's all grown up. Let's see, he and his restaurant Oyster Oyster have a Michelin star, Esquire magazine's best new restaurant, the 2023 outstanding chef for JBAward, snail of approval from Slow Foods, Wine Enthusiast magazine's best new restaurant in America, and the creme de la creme, Food and Wine magazine named Robb Rubba best new chef in America in 2022. I mean, I think he could just call it a day. You're all done. Out. So how did Robb evolve? Well, some of it actually had to do with another incredibly old friend, Mark Kuller. So I've mentioned my good friend Mark Kuller on this show several times over the years because he was an absolute force in the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene. It was a friendship I cherished. I miss him so much. It makes me tear up. And I think of him often. But Mark's son, Max, became a part of the industry, I believe thanks to his father, but we're going to find out more. But he, too, was on Foodie and the Beast eons ago, pouring sherry. And I remember this very well. I remember texting your dad and saying, your passion really shone through on the mic, and that you were one of the sweetest people I knew. And I said, I know I said this for a fact. I said, if you put his finger in water, it would become sweeter. And your dad felt the same way. Okay. Well, anyway, my tears aside, at some point, Max met Robb, and they started a business, and they changed the dining scene, not just in DC, but the conversation of plant-based dining in this country. So, hey, gentlemen.
Hello.
Thank you both for joining me today. Robb, I do want to start with you. A little background on, like, were you cooking at your grandma's knee? Like, what got you hot about food?
Wow, what got me hot about food? it wasn't really until late into my life, probably about 19 years old.
I was going to say, since you're like 32, I mean, seriously?
41.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, but it was later. It was around in college. I just started going out with some friends to eat and stuff.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to University of Arts in Philadelphia briefly to study
but
fine
I mean, you
arts.
were in a city that had a good dining scene.
Yeah.
An interesting dining scene.
Interesting dining scene.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was going to anything, revered or anything along the lines of that, but we'd go down to the Italian market and buy ingredients and cook dinner for one another. And at that time, I was kind of leaving art school. I wasn't sure that was the right thing for me. And then my parents suggested I go to work with my uncle in Connecticut at the Mohegan Sun Casino and Resort, where I was put into the pastry program. I figured they thought that was a good correlation with art and then pastry.
Sure.
And then that's when
Wait, when you say art, were you painting, sculpting,
I did
drawing, like what?
Oil painting and drawing. I mean, fine arts was my study. Dabbled with graphic design for a little bit too, which is something I'm dabbling with more again now these days.
Well, menu creation is not cheap, so.
No, exactly. And, through that, I started to discover food a lot more. I was living with my uncle at the time that was a chef, and he had this amazing cookbook collection. And I mean, every book you can think of at that time that was out, he had. And I would pull down these books and just start flipping through it and see this world of food I never knew. I grew up with we'd eat a lot at home, and it was like steak and potatoes and a salad, or maybe mom would make lasagna on a Sunday or something like that. And I wasn't really exposed to dining out. And then just seeing all this whimsy and magic and flavor profiles and ingredients I'd never seen before was just like so inspiring. It was this world I could just dive into. And that really gave me the itch and got me going and wanted to do this for a lifelong career. Yeah.
And so once you started working in restaurants, okay, like where were you, like, just give me like a couple of the places that sort of informed your cooking.
Yeah, so I think that foundation was really good at the casino because I really didn't have a lot of discipline yet. I was just this young kid that loved to like skateboard and listen to music and screw around. I really didn't have direction, so that was like a good thing to work around professionals and every day put on a uniform and show up to work on time. And if you didn't show up on time, you were told to go home and things like that. So that gave me a good foundation. And then
there is the military component to the chef's code and to the style that a kitchen is arranged in. Yeah. So it does provide a structure.
Exactly. And it's something I needed. I think I've always been a very creative-minded person. I like to do that. But if you don't have that structured discipline, it's very hard to use that to your advantage, right? So, and maybe make a living out of it. And I think my parents were a little worried with the art degree. But that was really influential. And just to have the support from my uncle in the early days, even now, to be a mentor was amazing for me. And then from there, I remember opening up the New York Times, and they were talking about the opening of Gordon Ramsay at the London Hotel in New York City. I saw all the chefs in there. They had their little white toques on, their blue aprons. There was like 50 people in the kitchen. I was like, I need to do that. So I left a girlfriend at the time. I left $300 in a duffel bag and went to New York City and went for a stage, and luckily got the job and lived on some couches for the first few months. And that restaurant changed everything because I'd not done fine dining up until then. And to be under like this wonderful place with all these professional chefs under the, magic of Gordon Ramsay at the time. This is before all the Fox screaming and all that on television. It was really
right. So everybody take your judgment off the table. Gordon Ramsay actually was a good chef before he was yelling at people.
And to work under that system and those chefs was life-changing. I'd never worked in a restaurant like that where, they put carpets down and they're vacuuming in between services and everything was so regimented and organized and it was a very stressful and very hard, but it really set the tone for me of what type of restaurant and what type of chef I wanted to be and where I wanted to go in my career. So that really set the projection and went really forward from there. I mean, then I worked for JBAward for 2 years in Las Vegas. Had a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Paris for a very long time. I had a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Vegas. Really honed my craft there and met some amazing people. and did some time in Chicago with briefly Charlie Trotter and the Rock Raw, and then New York again, dabbled a little bit.
But so what brought you to DC?
A baby on board.
All right.
My wife and I were expecting. I was in Philadelphia at the time. I didn't really feel like that had an opportunity for me, and I had some chef friends who had met through my journeys who were living in DC at the time and had started families. I came here, I fell in love with the food scene, with the people.
So this is when, like 2016, 2015?
2012, 2013.
Oh, so it's earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right around then. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been 10 years now.
Wow.
It's very wild. And
it goes fast.
Yeah, it goes really fast. Yeah. The kids make that thing go hyperspeed. Yeah, so we came here. I just like fell in love with the city. I saw like all these great restaurants. I saw the growth that was going on that time. I talked to a lot of folks that were here, and it just sold me on it. And I don't know, the rest is history there with the 10 years.
Okay, so but when you were, so while you're cooking all this time, you are a omnivore, carnivore, you're eating everything. Where are you personally?
Yeah. Personally, I've always leaned more towards wanting to eat vegetables, like on my days off, or fish. Like I go to the restaurant, I'm the one that orders the fruit dessert, the salad, and the fish course, and it always gets mixed up with my wife and I. It was always an issue. It's like, no.
Yeah, the misogyny in restaurants, we'll put that aside, but let's move on. That's a show for another day.
Yeah, we're going to do that one next time. Yeah, we can do that. But it's always like something I liked, but I couldn't see that being a way for me to travel in my career. I felt like I'd just be stuck on garde manger if I became a vegetarian, we'll say. And what I was learning, I mean, there was so much information, so I felt like that's how I had to keep doing to progress in my career. So, it was a very meat-heavy career, working meat station, roast station, making all the classic sauces, and those became the things I was very comfortable cooking, and they brought joy to people. So that kind of was my repertoire.
And so when did you personally make the switch?
I personally made the switch at Hazel in late 2017, which was strange because I was still at the restaurant. I was still in there working.
Well, I guess one could cook the food. Yeah. Even if one's not eating the food, but it is hard to taste along the way. It changes.
The cooks at first are like, did I mess something up? Because I'd eat it and I'd spit it out. And I would be like, did you not like it? Did I mess up a recipe? But
it's
you
hard
can do
to
it.
stay committed. I get that.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a big thing. So I started rethinking how I wanted to cook, what I wanted to cook, etc.
Okay, so now let's jump over to you.
Sure.
So Max, you came from a family that had restaurants. You got into the biz. Or were you hot about restaurants before your dad opened up Proof? I feel like you were so young.
Was. Well, so I actually was in restaurants before you opened Proof.
Okay. And I feel like you and I grew up similarly. I did not grow up like you. I mean, my family talked about food 24/7 and still does. Like, I'm sure that's my mom texting me right now being like, this is what we're doing for dinner. This is what we're doing for breakfast tomorrow. We may need a snack. What should we... I mean, like, I grew up in a family that talks about food all the time. So, and I know you grew up similarly.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in terms of restaurants, I got my first restaurant job was actually one summer in my first between freshman and college, freshman and sophomore year of college. I became a risotto cook at Teatro Goldoni for the summer.
No kidding.
So that was pretty awesome. Fabrizio definitely gave me a really good primer. He started me on a Saturday night in the busiest station of the restaurant, threw me in, and was like, at the end of it was like,
did you build up your arm muscles? Like,
yeah. I was doing like 6 risottos at a time to order them. I made it through that first night. He's like, all right, well, you can stay for the summer then.
And, good for you.
And then the next summer, I was a graveyard shift milkshake boy at the American City Diner.
No kidding.
I revolutionized a lot of their systems, I'm proud to say. And
got promoted
to become a server.
I mean, I just want to say for the record, I'm pretty sure their systems needed to be renovated, so congratulations.
And then from there, my dad, as you know, was a complete foodie in this era.
Right, and let's just give people, Mark opened up Proof. There was nothing like that in DC at the time, behind Doi Moi, and Two Birds, One Stone, also.
Exactly.
Amazing, and Estadio.
But before all that, I was in college in Rhode Island, and I was obsessed with a restaurant that many of your listeners may know called El Forno. And every time my dad would visit, we would go there and have great meals there. And when I graduated, my goal was just to work at El Forno. And it took me about a half a year to become a server there. It was one of the most amazing training experiences in my life, just months as a food runner and a busser. And ultimately, I was a server at El Forno for a while before I moved back to DC in 2005 to start a grad program at American University in Fine Arts. So timing just happened to work out in 2007 when I was finishing that program. My dad was on the verge of opening Proof. I had been in the restaurant business for a while.
You did, and I apologize for. I mean, not at all. That you already had the chops.
No, not at all.
You're not a what's the word? You're not a nepo baby.
I was still learning, but actually, I was about to move to New York. Actually, my art career was kind of going well at that moment, and I was like, "Well, Dad, I want to be part of the beginning of your restaurant. I'll wait tables for a few months." And of course, Michael wouldn't hire me to be a nighttime server. He didn't think I had enough restaurant experience. So I started in lunch, and then a month or so in, became a dinner server there. But and then of course, 3 years into being a server at Proof, I had really started getting the wine bug because
it was a wine-centric restaurant. Right?
We had 40 wines by the glass. We were doing amazing. I mean, Sebastian Zoutan and our whole team just kind of ultimately caught the wine bug. So it became a very cool place to learn about wine for a few years. But I had no intention of making restaurants my career. Still, even at that point, I was like, all right, I'm getting ready to move to New York.
When did that change?
So now we're in late 2009, early 2010. I'm still at Proof, and Estadio is being built. And my dad's looking for management team, and he couldn't find an assistant manager.
I just wanted to say, Estadio had the heaviest chairs ever. And I know some of them got stolen when they were opening, but I always remember those chairs. I was like, somebody has to push me in because I'm so little. I was like, I need somebody to push me in.
For a 6'6" giant.
I know. I know. He was like, these are for me, Mickey, not for you. Okay, so I want to catch us up because I want to get to where you guys met.
Sure.
So you get into Estadio. I know you really dive into wine.
Yeah, so Estadio is when I took on management roles, and then we in 2013 got ready to open Doi Moi. At that point, I was the beverage director for the company, so I was overseeing Proof and Estadio and Doi Moi. Unfortunately, my dad got diagnosed right around that same moment that we were getting ready to open Doi Moi. So things, quickly got a little messy. We had 150 employees at that point between the three restaurants. And
also one of the tightest teams.
Oh yeah,
I had Karoom, and you had Justin Guthrie. It was a heyday.
We had a rock star team.
It was a heyday,
and it was big, and it was thorough, and it was, really plug and play at that point.
Sure.
Everything was rolling along. But I was the only member of the family other than my dad who, was involved in the restaurants at that point. And four of us ended up taking over the three restaurants after he passed away. And there were just, put it, bluntly, there were a lot of growing pains. We were just trying to figure out how to keep things going the right way and the roles and all that.
Let's sort of depart there for a second.
Sure.
At what point, when all this is happening, do the two of you come together?
So about, I would say, a year or so after my dad was gone, the family was starting to realize that maybe this wasn't the best way to go forward. So we were having some talks about maybe doing some share swaps and, maybe having people, split off in ways.
Right.
So ultimately, we kind of reached preliminary terms that I would basically move all my interest into a Stadio.
I just want to, you keep coming, I just want to make sure that you're a little bit more in front of the mic. So
Sure.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Just want to thank you.
So at that point, it became clear that, I wasn't going to have a role in Proof and Doy Moy going forward or Two Birds, and was going to focus on a Stadio, which kind of gave me a little more bandwidth to think about things that might be next in my career. I knew that I wanted to, maintain a Stadio and strengthen a Stadio here in DC. My dad had kind of planted the seeds in my head that Charleston was a cool place. I hadn't been to Charleston
because Charleston is a cool place.
Until after he passed away.
Right.
But I went actually a couple weeks after he passed away to Charleston for the first time and totally saw everything he was talking about and saw this potential for a Stadio down there that we had kind of like mused about. So that was something that got in my head then.
Okay, but still, I don't know when you met him.
Yeah, well, we're not quite there yet.
I know, but we only have so much time for the show, so I want to
All right, we'll fast forward.
Yes.
So a few months later, as I was still exploring things, our mutual friends and Robb was working with a neighborhood restaurant group with Brent Kroll,
Also a pretty cool team, I might add, at that time, right?
Yeah,
like there was a lot going on over there too.
So actually, Robb and I, will say a little interjection, had met a little bit earlier at the Rammies one year on the dance floor. We had danced together. So we had good
bumping tushies.
Yeah, we had good vibes, good kind of mutual. So like we both kind of knew of each other. And Brent was like, I think the two of you both might like be thinking about a similar thing. And we sat down like the first couple weeks. Maxwell was open in Maxwell. And just had a very organic
This is Brent Kroll's Maxwell, for those of you who don't know.
So we sat down and we just started, having an organic conversation about...
Was your personal diet already vegetarian or vegan?
It was, yeah. I actually became a vegetarian when I was 16. So it was... I was very much the black sheep in the family because of that.
Okay.
It was a family. I mean, my dad's house had a vintage Burkle cutter on the coffee table.
Sure.
Meat was very much an important thing. But, there was a lot of support and respect always given towards my preferences. And so, yeah, at that point, I had been a vegetarian for, most of my life. And I knew if I ever was able to do a project that was personal and that I had more control of, doing something that was, elevated and plant-based was on the top of my list.
And was it on the top of your list?
At that point, when we started talking, I felt like that was the only direction I would go moving forward as a chef. Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about it is that you want to do a plant-based menu, but you wanted it elevated. Specifically, what was your vision and what was your vision, and how did you two come to it together? Because plant-based comes with, and you've integrated it, it comes with so many other things, right? Because you're talking about so many sustainability, and you're talking about, do we compost, and we're talking about food waste, like all these things sort of fall under the umbrella of plant-based. So how did you two manage all of that as you were putting together a tasting menu concept for a plant-based restaurant?
It's always a work in progress, right?
We definitely didn't know it was going to be all that at the beginning.
I think you just start diving in. I think the original words were sustainability and working with plants, maybe even being just vegetarian the first time. But we knew we wanted to do something special with that. And the deeper we dove and the more conversations we had, I think it was like just this big giant rock, and we started chiseling away, and by the end I think we have what we have today. But it by no means was that like this concept that we conjured up exactly what it was going to be and we were going to like full steam ahead and build that. I think it's just a constant work in progress, and it still is today.
Definitely.
Well, when you guys say so for people who haven't had the pleasure of going, I think we should back up a little bit and explain the concept as it is now, so that people have a good idea of what it means. Because I also want to sort of delve into, for people who don't know, what does it mean to be to run a restaurant, to run a kitchen sustainably?
Yeah.
But let's start with what Oyster Oyster is. And Why is it called Oyster Oyster? For those who don't know.
You can handle that one, please.
Sure. I mean, why is it called Oyster Oyster?
Because people are like plant-based, Oyster Oyster. I mean, I know why, but I'm throwing a softball.
Yeah, I mean, so as we were starting the project, the sustainability aspect was definitely a very important part of it. And we actually didn't know to what degree potentially other things from the sea might be fair game as we were formulating things initially. But we did know, actually, right when Robb and I first talked, I had started eating oysters. So I had went from a fairly strict vegetarian diet to eating oysters within those few months leading up to
So more of a vegan diet, not vegetarian, vegan.
So I've always been vegetarian, lacto-ovo, but I had started reading some stuff about some vegans that were eating oysters and
because they're so good for the environment.
Well, they're not only good for the environment, they're also non-sentient in that they don't have a true central nervous system. So the idea is that they don't really feel pain, and there's other, in other ways I could describe how they actually behave more like plants. They're reseeded. So oysters were already something that I was starting to eat. Under the idea that to me they were really more plants, and that kind of jived with the chef. And
I wasn't eating them up.
He wasn't eating them at that point.
So we had this relationship, and I remember looking at his Instagram post, and he's like, "Yeah, I just got the oysters forever." And I'm like, "I thought this guy was vegetarian. What is he doing?" Right? And then we had the conversation. And I was like, "Cool, I'm gonna start eating oysters too."
Well, so I'm trying to think who it is. I think it was Ellen Gray is vegan, but her rule had always been, "I don't eat things with eyes." So she would eat oysters because she's like, no eyes. So I always thought that was a very interesting way of sort of going about what you consume.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I mean, why was it called Oyster Oyster? To us, in the world of sustainability, the oyster was this beautiful symbol for both being, a fair game, but also this great icon of sustainability between filtering water, between being able to be reseeded, just totally. And then mushrooms on the other side, just also super highly sustainable, even more sustainable in a world that's kind of getting ravaged by some of the climate concerns we have now. So, being the fact that there's a mushroom called an oyster mushroom,
it worked beautifully.
We were like, all right, and we also had a really wonderful designer who kind of started playing around with the oyster shell and the mushroom, and we're like, wow, this is so cool. It's like almost a yin yang sort of sort of thing. And so that's why the name. Even though for us the name felt very natural and appropriate and fun, it was not well received in our early testing. As a matter of fact, most people we ran it by were like, that's just stupid. They were like, people are going to think it's an oyster bar. People are going to, why two oysters?
I have to tell you, listen, if you ask the question, you're not always going to like the answer.
That's true.
And I do think that people are very stuck in what they think they know, right? So if you had said to me, what do you think of the name Oyster Oyster? I probably would have said, yeah, I don't think it tells people what we're talking about. But now that I know what Oyster Oyster is, of course it tells people what you're talking about. I mean, it doesn't say all the things, but neither does a restaurant called Home or a restaurant or the Wine Lair.
Exactly.
Nothing necessarily says exactly what it is. But can we just for a moment take people through, because it's a very casual feeling restaurant. You don't have to get all dressed up. It's not super fancy, but there is a hospitable formality that's a part of the service and that takes you through the experience. I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and for people who haven't been able to because let's be honest, what is it, 30 seats, 35 seats? What do we got in there? 35 seats? Turnover what, 2-3 times?
2 turns.
Okay,
Yeah.
So, only so many people can get in at a certain point in time. So, for those who haven't had the experience, can we just kind of walk through it a little bit?
Yeah, so like we said, we always want to build something that was sustainable, and to us that means being extremely responsible with everything we do. So that started with the food, and that needs to transcend. When Max worked with the designer inside, the materials we picked were as sustainable as we could to still have a really lovely restaurant in a metropolitan area. But we wanted that genuine, really comforting, welcoming feeling you get at some of the best restaurants in the world, right? And we wanted to make sure we had that experience. And I think having like a 30-seat restaurant really instills that and gives you that time with your service staff, gives you time with the kitchen staff, and it really creates this moment with one another that's like really this escapism. You get to come to a place and be taken care of, and we're not just doing that for the environment. We want to do that for ourselves and kind of have this holistic approach as well for our own minds and our guests' minds when they come to dine at the restaurant. So that was really important to us. That open format was really big to the design too, where you just feel like you're kind of walking into a home in a sense, that you can see the kitchen working. Everything's very transparent. You have this really, really beautiful experience in front of you. And we want our staff to be able to feel like themselves too. So that's where like some of those formalities dropped off, right? Like they're not in like a stuffy suit or anything along the lines of that. We wanted to also kind of reflect ourselves a little bit in the service style, where it's a little laid back and you can be very professional and knowledgeable and very driven and not have to have this pretension behind it. And I think that was really important to us, especially with working with such a big topic like climate crisis and sustainability. We don't want to hit people over the head with that and give them like this kind of daunting experience.
Right. Because even though the restaurant is mission driven, you do want to make sure, I mean, we've all sat in a restaurant, I'm sure we would name several that are the same, where, you know, their mission is sort of hammered over the head. And I mean, there are foodies out there who love that shit. They're like, I'll take your mission, give it to me. And then, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are like, I want to eat a really good meal. You know, so finding that balance, I think, is important.
We thought that the power I mean, a lot of our power is with the food, right? I mean, it's not, I mean, our guests don't get the menu until the end of the meal. And we really want them to, you know, have this experience where they're engaging with food and having these delicious kind of eye-opening moments. And then, you know, processing it and being like, wow, we didn't have like, we basically just ate a vegan meal.
Right,
you know?
right.
And then reading the menu and being, oh my goodness, there was a parsnip in that. I hate parsnips. Right. Oh my goodness, there's beets. I never like beets. You know,
I loved it. Yeah.
And so I think that's like almost the preachiness, right? It's like that accidental, it's like, oh my goodness, you just blew my mind with vegetables. Vegetables can do this, right? And then our eyes are more open to like, you know, further experiences in our realm. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think we definitely want to make an impact, but we don't want to do it in that way.
It sounds like more what you want is you want the impact made that it's almost a self-discovery, right? Like people realize the impact after the meal.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Which is really interesting.
Because, I mean, I think the three of us would agree the reason why I go to restaurants is you love that feeling, that magic you get from it. I mean, that's what drew me into the industry. And to go to somewhere where you feel like you're going to a seminar is not enjoyable. No. We want that pleasure. Absolutely. I think that's the main thing. And through that, we do like storytelling and try to weave some of these things we're doing with sustainability into the spiels of the dishes. And
well, plus also your work with local farmers and the product that's being delivered. I mean, I assume you are constantly building relationships with what's available out there so that what you're bringing to the table is, I don't want to use the term freshest because mushrooms don't necessarily, you could have dried mushrooms or you could have, you know, things that are manipulated in different ways. So, but who are some of the people that you like sought out and now are there all these people seeking you out, being like, hey man, you need to check out my bok choy or whatever? Yeah,
I mean, that definitely does happen now. I mean, in the beginning, luckily we live in a world where social media exists and it's easy to kind of find these farmers and are on there and they're able to promote themselves.
The Mid-Atlantic is pretty lush.
It is.
Yeah, you know? It's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, we work with over 20 different small purveyors and farmers that like supply everything for the restaurant. Like when we say the sustainability elements and being local, like that's something we're really committed to. So our oil is a cold pressed canola coming out of Pennsylvania. It's the only thing we cook with in terms of oil. For sweetener, we don't use any like refined cane sugar. We only use maple, honey, and sorghum. So dessert kind of has a hint of that, but then that gives you a sense of place, right? Like, this is what it's like to eat Mid-Atlantic. That's what a sweetener would be for there. We're void of citrus fruits where we live. So it creates a lot of creativity and fun things.
Right, because that acid is, like that squirt of lemon can change a dish, right? So it's fascinating that you don't use it.
Exactly. It's fun, and you start to build techniques and a whole new repertoire. And I always say, like, we talked about my upbringing a little bit, and it's like how much of that I had to just like throw away of like years of abuse in kitchens that added up to not using any of those techniques or things anymore is really crazy. And we're kind of rebuilding everything, and it's really exciting for myself and the team to constantly be working in that realm.
And these things are, one thing that is so cool is by doing this process and staying true to this process of not bringing in things like lemons, we end up building a limited palette that creates a point of view and like a set of ingredients that becomes really exciting because it's so unique, right? Like we've talked several times about the Oulipo, which is a French writing group that would kind of create like limits on their poems in order to create more interesting texts. But we're creating like limits by the natural boundaries of what we view like the limits of our sustainability enabled sources. That creates interesting foods.
Sure.
And then you combine that with the techniques and as we've continued to evolve and grow, Chef and his team have been able to explore more and more different techniques between fermentation and preservation and, things that we can now say, okay, well, we have this awesome, local ingredient from 6 months ago that we now have in this way that never would have happened if we had the floodgates of the world at our disposal, right? Like where we could just be, we'll go to India for this thing that will play this role.
Right.
And I think that's one of the most unique things about the restaurant. I think it's, just thinking inside of like the sandbox of the region is very fruitful, but I think in a lot of people's minds, it's a scary thing to kind of go down that road because, you might be like, well, what if I really need lemon for my dish? What if I really want to bring
Well, it is daunting.
Yeah.
But it's not daunting for you all because these are the parameters you have set for yourself. I want to jump in just a little bit on the wine program because it is very interesting. Is it 100% natural wines? Close to it?
Well, I would say we probably define, I think those are hard words to really define. I think that everything we use, we believe is being handled in the most sustainable, way possible. I think that for certain wine regions, there's bigger challenges in terms of maybe something ever being officially designated organic.
Well, no.
I'm
not talking, because that's no different than farmers who don't get the organic designation. They can't afford it, so therefore they don't do it, but it doesn't mean their practices aren't organically based.
Sure. Yeah.
But the wine purveyors that you're bringing to the table have something that are important to you both, right? Which is why, you have a terrific wine list, but it's not, for the uninitiated, it's not like everybody looks at that wine list and they're like, yeah, I don't know anybody on here, or it's unfamiliar.
Definitely, but I think that there's definitely room for wines on our list where they're paying respect to the land and using traditional methods, and I think that there's the only place I put a caveat on that natural wine idea is there's a lot of wines on our list which are not natty at all, right? They're natural.
I know, but there were for a while when natural wines were sort of gaining traction, right? Like a lot of traction. It was almost like gauntlet thrown. Like who could pour the funkiest, cloudiest, wine and then drink it and be like, this is delicious, And I was always like I always, in my world with what I do feel like when I come in, people a lot of times are gauntlet thrown. They're like, well, here's Nycci. She must eat everything. She must drink everything. So they'll put, something crazy in front of me. And I'm like, Okay, I'll taste it, but I don't want it. Do you know what I mean? Like, can I just get my Sancerre, please? But, so I just wonder, like, how you go about doing that, and then serving somebody like me, being like, I want a Sancerre. What would, are you able to find the products on the list?
I think the answer is there's plenty of Sancerres that are fair game for us. Right. Because a lot of Sancerre is super respectful to the land and natural tradition. So I think that, we've had a few different people in charge of our wine list. There has been evolution there, and I think there's evolution in terms of how we're, think about not just between the different minds, but also we want wines that are delicious, and we want the wines that are singing with our food. So those are things we're evaluating just as much as, just at this, those are also taking big weight in terms of how we're sourcing wines and what the decisions we're making.
Well, let me just ask you both a question. So as you guys were putting the concept together, we don't have a lot of time to talk about the launch because it was, you did takeout during the pandemic and then you opened in 2021. But was it a hard, you said, like you would tell people Oyster Oyster and they'd be like, that's a dumb name. Was it a hard sell when you first were launching, when the doors were ready to open? How did you you were both well known in the area. So there's already trust from a certain part of the community who's like, I know Robb, I know his food, I know he's going to be good. I know Max, he's been a part of the industry for so long. I know whatever he's doing is going to be solid. So you have trust already, but the concept was new for so many. How did you get a lot of pushback? Were people tough on you both? And what about money?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, were people just like, plant-based, here you go, pay you?
I mean, to start with, it was a very, 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 very hard restaurant to find investors in. It was
not now. I'm sure they're throwing money.
I'm sure it'd be very different if we were marketing shares now. But it was literally like trying to sell ice to Eskimos. It was or worse, it was no one had any interest.
Yeah. I song and dance, and then they'd just be like, bye.
Well, but I just want to say, here's the one thing I will say to you both. I mean, when I started in the industry 20 years ago, I had a friend who was vegetarian. And whenever we would go out, it was either like a plate of steamed vegetables, in the beginning, early days, a plate of steamed vegetables, a plate of pasta. I was like, they can't put together a compost. It was almost like the kitchen was offended. But, now, in that 20 years, obviously, the conversation has shifted greatly. And you could really go to a large swath of very well-respected restaurants that will at least have some dishes that are composed dishes that are specifically plant-based for the diner. Do you know what I mean? So, like, you're doing an entirely plant-based menu is not out of the question. Its time has come. Obviously, you've got all the accolades to prove it.
Yeah, I just think there was a lot of reservation. I think there hadn't been a lot of restaurants at the level that we were trying to do it that have shown success, right? There's cuisines, you can go to India, you can go to Southeast Asia. They've done vegetarian and vegan food forever, and it's phenomenal, right? Like, you can go to those restaurants and have it, but to say we're doubling down on just buying local, we're talking about the sustainability thing, I think is where some of the rolled eyes started. But I think also the COVID starting really made people think, where is your food coming from? I think that was kind of this nice little bubble for us to then open with, because it gave so much of our community and the food world and just diners in general time to think. And a lot of them only resource was, I'm going to support this local farm and buy this CSA to my house. And I think it connected a lot of folks to like eating more vegetables, because you couldn't just go to the grocery store, and not a lot of folks in DC just have chickens and cows in their backyard. So they had to eat that way. And I think that gave us a good opportunity when we opened the doors. And I'd say like the early subscribers when we first opened were majority vegetarian and vegan diners, but as the word got out, it's just like the amount of guests that come in now, they're like, I'm a hardcore meat eater and I love this and all that. So it's given us some, it gave us all as humans a good opportunity to kind of reflect on how we should be eating and how we should be treating the environment. So I'd say that had we opened and COVID never happened, maybe it would have been a little harder,
I don't know. I maybe, but I just feel like you brought it up. I mean, with all the climate issues that are happening, I mean, you said that off air that somebody had said to you at some point that your being a vegetarian wasn't changing our climate issues.
Yeah, well, really early on, I remember just being a teenager and, it's sometimes coming up as vegetarian. I remember hearing multiple times, like, one person being a vegetarian is not going to make any difference.
That's like saying one vote doesn't count. I mean, we
all
know it's wrong.
It is. But, especially feels impactful, at this stage of my career, like that, if we didn't believe in this idea that everyone was so skeptical of, and we didn't just keep pushing forward and saying, no, we're going to prove you wrong. I mean, we first of all, we didn't think we could do, you asked like, why was it going to be elevated? We didn't think we had a choice. We thought if we didn't elevate the food enough, it wouldn't work. Because
like if you did an a la carte menu?
Well, even if it was like, just not kind of pushing technique and kind of figuring out like how to make the food truly special. Because, we'd seen people try to open higher end vegetarian restaurants, but without really maybe matching, that level of it, and seeing those not really work in general in our estimation. So we really, we were like, no. I mean, first of all, I believed in Robb as a chef, so I knew we had a ability to create something that was truly special and was going to be doing this type of cuisine.
Also, I do want to say your restaurant has parking, which honestly is a huge sell for people coming in from the Bridge and Tunnel crew.
Yeah,
I know that sounds silly, but it is true.
We do have good parking.
You do? Yeah, good parking.
But without it being at that level, we thought that we could easily end up in a scenario where we're not filling the dining room every night, we can't be, which is really, I mean, we're in a luxurious position today because we know, we're full, right? So that makes it so much easier, or it does make it so much easier to push things, right?
Well, not only that, financially, you know what's happening, right? You know how much food if we did the math on that, like I think that's why so many other restaurants, especially after the pandemic, are doing tasting menus because costs are what they are. And they know, well, if I do a tasting menu and I either do reservation only or I'm only going to take 10 walk-ins or whatever it is, I know exactly how much food I have. This is not going, like waste is not an issue, which is obviously really important. And I know what I'm going to cover my numbers, which is good business.
Definitely.
Because otherwise it's like, you're like, I don't know how many people are coming in tonight.
Exactly.
It's a crapshoot.
It's sustainability. Those practices actually, they do save money. There might be a little bit of an upfront investment for you or seem like something harder to do, but once you get it rolling, it's way better in the long run, right? Like definitely shows it with what we do. Like we don't use any single-use plastics. There's no plastic wrap, no sous vide bags, no takeout containers. Like just not those upfront purchases is really great for a restaurant financially, but more importantly for the environment. Like we're not just throwing a bunch of
because those sous vide bags, like there's nothing. It's like those are not recyclable. There is nothing you can do with them.
Nope. And we get to be what we are. We get to like do what we do, right? It's like we make dinner for the 50 people that come every night, and we're equipped to do it the best we can, and we don't create waste. It just all, the better we've got at things, the more actually sustainable it's all become, because it all just flows together, right?
That makes sense. So I'm just sort of curious, because I've done some work with the zero waste people. What would you say your waste is at? You must be so minimal because you compost. Yeah.
So in terms of anything that would go in your standard, waste pickup trash can is very minimal. Like it's our farmers we work with, we try to have a closed loop system where they bring product in a container, we take it out of that container, put it into our container, and it goes back. There's not like a bunch of plastic and boxes that get thrown away. And then our composting program is really serious and not having any other things like, miscellaneous plastic to go in there. It's all going into compost if we're not making interesting things out of it. We try to look at, a lot of our dishes are kind of built around that one ingredient, how many times we can like replicate it, or can we do something interesting with this trim, and then that slides into the next dish, and kind of creating this zero waste mentality without like really making it a big deal. I don't know. It's like at this point, it's just very intuitive what we do. It's like it's not really.
Yeah. And the garage factors in too.
I was just going to bring up the garage. Okay, so now you have the garage next door, Oyster Garage. It's a pizza place. Yes. What are we calling it?
More of an oyster bar first.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an oyster bar.
Yeah.
Because people are always like, you don't serve oysters in this restaurant called Oyster Oyster.
Okay, so wait, I'm sorry.
I
I thought you were doing pizza. Did I totally
we
that?
do like these cool little personal pan pizzas.
Right.
But we, there's no oven and kitchen equipment out there, so we do a very minimal amount. We do about 12 of those a night.
Okay.
And it's like first come, first serve. So we do have those available.
And I assume the cheese is vegan.
We do it with or without. So you have the option to get it classic. We use a really great cheese. It's called Meadowrella. They're playing on mozzarella, and it's grass-fed cows out of Pennsylvania. It's really, really good stuff. They're practicing a lot of regenerative things. And then if not, we make like really good sauces and everything on there. And since most vegan cheeses are made out of ingredients that wouldn't be found in Mid-Atlantic, we can't really utilize
That's
that.
what I was kind of curious.
Personally, not something I enjoy. So
No, me either. I've tried. I really have tried. I don't get it.
Although that sunflower whiz is always welcome on my plate.
Exactly.
That we used to use in our cheesesteaks. The vegan sunflower whiz is...
I'll have to try that.
Kind of,
well, we didn't even talk about the marigold butter.
Yeah, the vegan sunflower whiz is like offspring of the marigold butter, right?
All right, I feel like I have to get into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Oyster Garage is oysters.
Oysters, and then we do some like
and the space is like the size of this table. It's so tiny.
Yeah, it's small. It's tiny.
Yeah.
But the last thing that we're doing there are some salads, which is another vehicle for us to use food in ways that. So once upon a time, we thought the garage might be called Scrappies ultimately. With the idea that we use scrap. And
love it.
So it's it's Oyster Garage, but it still has some of that ethos of trying to again maximize everything.
I love that. Okay. Anyway, all right. Tell me where we can find you and where we can find you.
You mean social? Or you can find me in Harleyville, South Carolina.
Okay. Where there is an Estadio in Charleston. We did not get to that. Go ahead.
My hashtag is at Max Kuller, MaxKuller, on Instagram.
Great.
Exclusively.
Okay. And chef?
Yeah. At the restaurant, Oyster Oyster in Washington, D.C., 1448th Street Northwest. Or you can find me on Instagram.
With parking!
Now with parking.
Right.
And you can find me on Instagram. I have left X. I am sorry.
That's all right.
You can find me on Instagram at Robb Rubba. That's Rubba. Yeah.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining me. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up. Everything you heard here today, you can find on the listareyowanit.com. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. And if you have any questions for Chef or Max today, ask me. I am sure to get you the answer. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're at the gorgeous Wine Lair. I'm grateful for them and Ada and Hardcast Media, all the people who make this show happen. So much is going on in the hospitality industry, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. Stay up to date on all of it. Be safe out there and have a delicious week.